My name is Surmili and I'm the Partnership and Engagement Lead here at Ethnic Community Council of Victoria, and we're also known as ECCV. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I am joining today, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us here today. Um, Today's agenda will look like something like this. We have two very special guests, subject specialists, presenters. They will talk about the Victoria's move towards fully electric homes, the new upcoming safety and energy efficiency standards for rental properties. And our presenters will also share practical tips to help reduce our energy bills, make our homes more comfortable, and also help us understand how this new mandatory compliance may affect rental properties. So this webinar is being recorded and we will upload it onto our ECCV website. So it'll be accessible post the webinar session today. I'd like to thank you again for being part of this webinar. Our presenters will do their best to address as many questions as possible during the Q&A, which the Q&A session will be at the end of the webinar. So please type your questions in the chat. And we will be flexible on time, so we can go over time if that's needed. Now, I think I should invite our first guest speaker, um, our, our presenter, Dean Lombard. So a little bit about Dean. Dean is an energy policy specialist. He's a consumer advocate, a former social worker with extensive experience working with Renew and other non-profit environmental and community organisations. He advances policies that support residential energy consumers, particularly disadvantaged and hardship affected households. Dean has played a key role in shaping hardship frameworks, supporting community energy initiatives, and advocating for stronger health, safety, and energy efficient standards with a focus on ensuring a fair and consumer-focused energy transition. So I'd like to pass it over to you, Dean.
Thanks, Amelie, and welcome everybody. It's great to be here. I'm going to talk a bit about the changes in rental regulations for quality standards, uh, safety, etc. And yeah, give a bit of context for that and let you know what you need to know if you're renting, and we'll have a bit of information for anyone who might be here who owns an investment property and wants to know what they need to do. So the first thing is I'm just going to go over the standards and what they are. And I guess the context of standards is that we haven't really had rental standards in Australia anywhere until pretty recently. Although there was a big growing awareness of a lot of issues related to poor quality housing, including poor health, lack of safety, high energy cost. While we had some government schemes that gave people discounts to upgrade homes or gave people free access to upgrade homes, such as insulation, rental properties, very few rental properties actually took advantage of those changes. And seeing that, and as well as the fact that it was very hard for tenants to understand how well their houses performed, and people might pay the same rent for a house that performed well in terms of energy efficiency, one that performed badly. This is really what led to putting in legal standards. And another part of the Victorian rental law change is also what they call gas substitution, which is replacing gas appliances with equivalent efficient electric appliances because they're cheaper to run and because gas is becoming more expensive and because gas has emissions and we're trying to reduce emissions. So my little detour into why electrification is better for people in their homes is that modern efficient electric appliances are much cheaper to run than the equivalent gas. These charts are from some analysis that Renew did several years ago. um, the amount that you pay to get a certain amount of heat out of a gas heater is much higher than what you need to pay to get the same amount of heat out of an efficient electric heater. It's the same for hot water systems. So replacing gas appliances with efficient electric ones for heating and hot water absolutely saves people money in the cost that they pay to run that to buy the energy they need to run their home. Um, these are the charts for those who like charts, and I won't leave them up for too long, don't worry. It's just some other analysis. This one is done by the Victorian Government that just shows how much a typical house spends on energy if they've got all gas appliances versus if they've got all electric appliances, different types of air conditioners. Obviously, if people have solar, they spend even less. Not an option often for renters, but there are some possibilities there. And as well as costs, some people are concerned about emissions, and this analysis that Renew did quite a few years ago now, and it's or even back then in I think 2019, in most parts of Victoria, there were fewer emissions from having electric appliances rather than equivalent gas appliances in a home, and now the electric emissions are even lower because the emissions in the Victorian electricity grid are probably about half what they were when we did these numbers and getting even lower. So that's why electrification is a thing that that the Victorian government's looking at and that a lot of us working in the area also support. The other thing I want to touch on just briefly, and I think James is probably going to talk a bit more about this, is that a really big part of how your house works in terms of how much energy it uses to keep you warm in winter and cool in summer is what they call the thermal performance of the house. How well it keeps heat in when it's cold outside and how well it keeps heat out when it's hot outside. And this little chart that we've got from a government website to show the examples of how much heat you lose from all the different parts of your house in winter and how much heat comes in through all the different parts of the house in summer. And if you do stuff to the house to slow down that movement of heat from outside in summer and from inside out in winter, it just leads to much more comfort and much lower energy costs because you just need less heating and less air conditioning. So this is why the energy efficiency or thermal performance of the actual building is as important as the energy efficiency of the appliances that you use in the home. And that's why the new rental standards have stuff about the thermal performance of the house as well as the efficiency of the appliances inside it. So that's sort of the why of rental quality standards. This is the how. How is it in place and how does it work? Basically, there's a set of standards, which I'm going to go through in a second, covering a whole lot of different things. And rental properties now have to meet the standards at the time that they are advertised, like when they're advertised for rent, and also whenever the rental agreement is renewed. That means if there's a new lease or if a lease is renewed or if a lease changes to what they call a periodic tenancy, a month by month rent without a fixed lease. They're the times when the property has to meet the standards. And the benefit of it working this way is that if you go and have a look at a house that's up for rent, if you're looking for a place, you can see if, I mean, you can see as far as you can whether there are issues in it that don't meet the standards once you know what the standards are. And because it's at the inspection point, you can ask for it to be fixed before you sign the contract or before you move in. Or if you've already signed the lease, you can actually cancel the agreement if it doesn't meet the standards and there's no penalty. Or you can move into the house anyway and then request urgent repairs to fix the things that are wrong with the house that don't meet the standards. There's this link here is to a checklist of all the rental standards. It's sort of designed for property owners so they can make sure, but it's good for tenants too to have a look at, what other things you got to tick off. I would take that to an inspection if I went, just so I can see, has it got a heater, blah, blah, blah. This link is to a good section on Tenants Victoria's website about the minimum standards so that you can find out a bit more, find out what the standards are. And Consumer Affairs Victoria, which is a government body that looks after issues facing people who are purchasing things, they have this form on their website where you can report a rental house that doesn't meet the standards. And you can actually go to inspections and use this to report houses that you see at an inspection that doesn't meet the standards. The standards are considered pretty important legally. A house that doesn't meet the standards but is offered for rent, that's now considered a criminal offence, and there are quite extensive fines for breaching the law in that way. There's also a recognition that some property investors maybe don't have enough money to upgrade their properties, and there are discounts and other types of assistance available to property owners to upgrade to meet the standards. So I'm going to go into what the standards are now. Um, and there's a few sort of different groups of standards. And the first one I'm going to talk about is appliances. And the main appliances that the standards cover are heaters, cooling equipment, and shower heads. When we're talking about energy efficiency, standards cover lots of other areas. I'm going to go over in the end some of the other areas they cover, but I'm going to focus on the energy usage and the energy efficiency standards. So those standards are water efficient shower heads because that saves hot water usage, which also saves energy usage. Currently, that's a three-star standard. That's the way that the shower heads are rated, and it's increasing to four-star standard in 2027. There's a rule about heaters. There must be a fixed heater in the main living area of the house. That means not a portable heater, actually a fixed installed in place heater. And since 2023, that has to meet this fairly basic efficiency standard of 2 stars. What that means in practice is probably either a gas ducted heating system, which are considered efficient, though they are quite expensive to run, or a reverse cycle air conditioner that can always heat. These are the most cheapest to run form of fixed heating. And my expectation, having been working in this area for a while, is that as rental houses increasingly meet the standards, reverse cycle air conditioners will probably become the most common form of heating because they basically are the most cost effective for the owner to install. And that's good because it's also the most cost effective for the occupier of the house, the tenant, to operate. And there's also a cooling standard that's coming in March next year. And similar to the heating standard, it's has to be in what's in the main living area. It's really up to the house what's considered the main living area. And the good thing about the way the heating and the cooling standards work together is that a reverse cycle air conditioner heats and cools, heats in summer, heats in winter, cools in summer. This is part of why I think this will become the most common because, you install one of these, you meet both these standards. And um, and the the way that these come into place, like there must be a fixed heater, even if the house is not changed over to a new lease. Um, the cooling standard only has to happen when a new lease is signed or a lease is converted from a fixed lease to a periodic. But from 2030, even if there hasn't been a change of lease, cooling will have to be installed. And this is a pretty important issue because some people are in rental houses for a long time and may not have had a new lease for years and years. And there is a risk that, was brought to the government's attention that this could mean that some houses don't get upgraded. And that's why some of the standards will come in even if there's no new lease. And these are pretty important ones to come in. Um, there's also a rule about appliance replacement, and this is a newer standard that's coming in from March next year. And this is where the efficient energy usage aspect and the reduced emissions and electrification aspect sort of comes into it. In a rental property, after the 1st of March 2027, if a gas heater fails and can't be repaired, it must be replaced with an efficient reverse cycle air conditioner. And if a gas hot water system fails, it must be replaced with an electric hot water system. And these are rules specific to rental. For owner occupiers, there may be some in the room. There's also rules about appliance replacement for owner occupiers. If you own a house that you live in, they're a bit different. You still have to replace the gas hot water system that can't be repaired with an electric alternative, either a heat pump or a solar hot water system. But you're not required to replace gas heating with reverse cycle air conditioner if it needs to be replaced, but it's sort of encouraged. And this link is to more information on the new Victorian rules about building electrification that covers owner-occupied homes as well as rental properties. I mentioned before, there's appliance stuff and there's also what we call thermal treatment, how well the home performs. Um, the main standards relating to thermal treatment are window coverings, uh, curtains have to be in all bedrooms and living rooms. Unfortunately, not all curtains are that good at preventing at reducing heat transfer through windows. Some are and some aren't. We'll touch on the implications of that in, I think, the next slide or the one after. Um, have I got that? Yeah. Um, Now, there's this rule about structural soundness. The property has to be weatherproof, which means it can't leak, it can't have major drafts. And there are specific rules from July next year that draft proofing is required on all windows and external doors because drafts coming in under doors and around windows, they take heat out of the house, they bring cold air into it. They can really affect the ability of a house to stay warm in winter in particular. There's also a ceiling insulation standard coming in, and that's not till March next year. And and that is only for rental properties that have no insulation in the ceiling. Unfortunately, if houses have sort of partial insulation or not enough insulation to be effective, that rule unfortunately doesn't cover it yet. I'm hoping that that will change in a few years because um, a certain amount of insulation is required for it to perform properly. Still, the ceiling insulation requirement, even being imperfect like this, is a huge improvement on where we're at. And there was a study done by Sustainability Victoria about 10 years ago now that found that more than half of rental properties didn't have, either had no insulation or had not enough insulation. So hopefully this will make a big difference because ceiling insulation really helps the warmth to stay in the home when it's cold outside. There's some other stuff that's at a touch on, which is in the other standards. There's some more that are related to energy and safety. And the most important ones of those, I think, are electrical switchboards. This rule is in place now that there needs to be a modern switchboard with proper circuit breakers and safety switches. There's a photo. That's my switchboard, actually. It meets the standard. It looks a bit ratty, but it's got all the proper circuit breakers. It's got the safety switches, so it improves electrical safety. And smoke alarms, there's been a rule for smoke alarms in rental properties for quite a while, but now they're required to have an annual check every year. The other electrical safety standard, actually, that I haven't written here is every 2 years, a rental property needs to have an electrical safety check and a gas safety check just to make sure there's no problems. Now, I did mention I'm really focused on the energy usage and safety related standards. There's a whole lot of other standards. It would be a much longer presentation to cover all of those, but they cover what the minimum standards for bathrooms, kitchens, laundries, everything I've got on here, locks on the doors. It's a good read to have a look, and this link here goes to the web page that shows all the rental standards, including all those other ones on bathrooms, kitchens, toilets, etc. And if you go into the detail of the regulations, there are some exemptions for heritage listed properties. That's a bit more too much detail to go into now, but it's explained when you look at the rental standards list there. And as well as the quality standards, there's other changes to laws, and we probably also don't have heaps of time to go into all this now, but I've listed some of the most important ones here. One of the important ones is limitations on how evictions can happen, and that's really in response to the risk that tenants wanting to get their standards, asking for the standards to be met, could face. Might be afraid that they might be evicted if they make a fuss. A lot of tenants are afraid to ask for repairs and upgrades because they're worried about being evicted. There are more restrictions on evictions now, so it's harder for property owners to evict tenants who are asking for repairs. I mentioned the safety checks. There's a whole lot of other stuff around training property managers, having standardized rental applications, limitations on lease break fees, rent payment fees. All of these things, I think, are making a bit of a difference to quality of life and security of tenure for rentals. One of the ones that a lot of people like is that it's now easier to have a pet if you're in a rental. All those other rental or change are explained at this link here. So if you're interested in finding out more about those, have a look at that and see all the information about that in there. Now, one of the last parts about the in the rental changes more generally is that as well as the standards for energy efficiency and appliances and the ones around sort of fees and leases and evictions and everything, there's also been a big change to tenants' rights to modify properties. One of the things that tenants for a long time have been a bit unhappy about is that, you can't even put a picture hook in the wall to hang a picture because you have to like get permission and all that. And these rights to modify properties rules have come in to address those issues. There's now a bunch of things that tenants are allowed to do without permission, as long as they can undo the change when they leave the house. And some of those directly relate to energy performance, including tenants are allowed to put window film on windows. You can buy it from hardware stores and other places to help insulate windows, reduce transfer of heat through the windows. Um, as long as you can take this film off when you leave the property, you're allowed to do that without permission. Tenants are allowed to put their own curtains up as long as they store the curtains that came with the house. And this is a great benefit because some curtains that might have come with the house might be very thin, and tenants can buy thicker curtains, new or secondhand in op shops and garage sales, because thicker curtains will actually help reduce heat transfer through windows a bit more than the thin curtains. You can get special thermal curtains or blinds. They're quite expensive. People who own houses often get them. For a tenant, they may not seem worth it to pay the cost for proper rated thermal performing curtains, but any thick curtains will make a difference. And making lots of little differences sometimes is the way that you get to the comfortable place. Um, Tenants are allowed to um, install their own low flow shower heads and anchors for blind cords to make them safe for little kids. These are actually already mandatory as part of the standards, as I mentioned the shower heads before. So these are required already. Blind and cord anchors are becoming. I think this year they become mandatory even if you don't change your lease. But if your house doesn't have them, tenants can put them in themselves. And there's many other things that make life a bit easier for tenants, including child safety devices like those little locks that you put on cupboards to stop toddlers opening cupboards, picture hooks, shelves, wireless doorbells. With things like picture hooks and shelves, if you've got to screw holes in the walls, you need to like patch the holes yourself when you move out, or ask the landlord if it's okay to leave them, but you are allowed to do it without permission, as long as you rectify it when you move out. There's a whole lot more stuff that you can do with permission, but these with permission things, the property owner is basically required to agree unless they've got a really good documented reason why not. And these things include adding draft proofing to doors and windows, or gaps in walls, so weather seals and gap filling, and other things that might be needed for safety or to help reduce energy and water bills. That might vary according to the house, but basically tenants need to ask the owner if they can make a change like this, but the owner is really required to agree unless they can give a good reason why not. Now, some of these changes might not be worth it for a tenant because they might cost a bit of money and the tenant might not know how long they're in the house. So the tenant, you still need to make your own judgment about is it worth it? How long do I think I'll be here? How confident am I that I'll be in this house for long enough to make this money expenditure worthwhile to save energy and water bills? But the option is there for tenants who work out that it's the right choice for them. There's other things such as fly screens, planting gardens, and painting. Again, tenants need permission to do these things, but the landlord is pretty much supposed to agree, unless they've got a good reason why not. And there's more information about all the renter modifications. That's the main thing about the standards that I think tenants need to know. If I've missed anything, and I may have, pop a question in the chat and we'll look at it at the end. I just want to give a quick little thing at the end on the information and help there is for rental providers, people who own the houses that you rent. And And one of these is, I always put this here just to show people, there's a lot of reasons for upgrading, and complying with the law is one, but you also actually improve comfort and reduce costs for your tenants. And you make your house more desirable, which probably helps it perform better as a rental for the owner as well. Um, and some of the changes, especially the electrification changes, actually increase safety and make maintenance a bit simpler as well, especially with the safety checks that are required. And also a reminder that for property owners, if you're making repairs or upgrades to a house, they're usually tax deductible one way or another. I'm not an accountant, but talk to an accountant or look at the ATO website for information about that. And I also like to put this little graph up, which just shows the huge difference in energy costs, or the energy needed to keep a house warm and cool, depending on if it is not very thermally efficient, such as 3 star, which is considered pretty bad, not much insulation, maybe lots of drafts, compared to 6 star or 7 star. 7 star is now the rule for new homes. You can see that, a new home uses about a quarter of the energy of an old, poor performing home of the same size to keep warm. This is a huge difference that it makes. And a lot of property investors don't actually, they haven't lived in the home. They actually don't know how the house performs. So this is a good indication of it can make a difference. So make sure that you check it out. Now, some of the financial assistance available to landlords is through this Victorian Energy Upgrades program. And some people don't realize that while these discounts for heaters and hot water and other things are available to owner occupiers, they're also available to property investors, rental providers, people who own homes that they rent out. And there can be quite significant discounts depending on what the old inefficient appliance is that you're taking out and what the new one is that you're putting in. So it can reduce the cost quite a bit. And then the rest of the cost is still tax deductible, whether through depreciation usually or through as a straight tax deduction. So also for cooktops, so a bit less for cooktops. Um, and there's lots more in the energy upgrades program, including lighting, pool pumps, shower heads, um, energy assessments, which James is going to talk more about energy assessments, I'm pretty sure. Ceiling installation discounts are coming in a couple of months. Not much detail yet, but the government says it'll work out as a 30 to 50% discount, so could reduce the cost by between a third and a half. There's also a special solar for rentals program. Look, here's the link for energy upgrades. The solar for rentals. It's similar to the scheme for homeowners. It's got a few rules about how much you're allowed to increase the rent after you install solar, and there's this provision that allows a tenant to agree to co-contribute to some of the cost. I think that seems a bit more complicated than worth it to me, but that's there. So all that information is on this interesting webpage about solar for rentals. Um, and the other stuff, really, the main thing is, and this is good for anybody who lives in a house, as well as people who own a house who are replacing appliances, look at the energy rating. Most appliances that use a lot of energy have this energy rating, and the really efficient appliances use way less energy than older or less efficient appliances, and it can make a really big difference. So I really recommend, whether you're buying a fridge or whether you're buying a new heater, if you're a property owner, check out the energy efficiency rating. Usually, the extra cost of getting a more efficient appliance is is easily paid back in a few years by reduced energy usage. And look, here's a few more links. I'll leave them up there just for 30 seconds so people can take a shot if they want. About the Victorian Energy Compare website that helps you find a better energy deal. Renew has this great information about switching from gas to electricity and finding efficient appliances. And I've already shared these links, the information about rental standards, the information about the solar program, and this Your Home website has lots of information about improving your home's energy efficiency. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. I hope that was helpful. I'm looking forward to the next bit.
Thank you, Dean. That was a lot of information and a lot of great information, from matter of fact. Um, Now, we are going to take questions right at the end. So questions are coming through the chat. All of the links that and the information Dean shared with us, we are putting it. We've put that in a document, and it's actually in the chat, and we'll also paste that onto our website as well. Now it's time for the presentation from James, who's our next presenter. James is the founder of Australian Energy Assessments, and he is the government accredited energy assessor. He has more than 15 years in the energy efficiency sector across North America and Australia. James' career spans hands-on technical work in energy efficiency and electrification, giving him a practical, evidence-based understanding of how homes actually gain and hold and use energy. Drawing on that experience, James leads an independent, unbiased team dedicated to closing the education gap that often sits between government policy, industry, and everyday people, translating the complexity of the energy transition into clear, achievable advice. James said his mission is simple: to help homeowners, renters, and businesses cut through the noise, make confident decisions, and take genuine steps towards more comfortable, affordable, and efficient living. So I'm going to pass this straight on to James.
Perfect. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. And Dean, thank you so much for, I feel like I learned some stuff in that. So thank you so much. And I believe that ECCV is going to be sharing their screen and putting my slides up in a second here. Perfect. So we want to talk about a renter's guide to a warmer, healthier, more affordable home. And often this is something that can be a little bit hard, or what people think is unachievable as a renter. Often a lot of the support that is out there seems like it's really targeted towards home ownership. And I guess our experience is that, one of our biggest contracts is actually with Homes Victoria and social housing, giving that real practical advice around what renters can do, what they have control of, but also some of the conversations that they can have, or where to seek some of that advice and help, which Dean's also covered greatly. I'll go to the next slide, please. So I guess the main point is I want to get across is who we are. So Australian Energy Assessments, like Somali said, we're an independent, non-government, sales company. We don't sell products or services. Our main goal is that for years we've seen that there's quite an education gap between the companies that are offering advice, solutions, and sales, and the everyday Australians who are seeking these solutions. So unfortunately, what we generally see is the rabbit hole that a lot of people go down when they start looking for solutions because their bills are really high, whether they're gas or electric, or they're not comfortable in winter or summer. They start jumping on Google and they start looking for solutions. Now, naturally, what happens is we end up going down a bit of a rabbit warren, finding some solutions, but what we end up with is talking to a solar company whose natural solution is solar and batteries. We talk to the insulation company and their solution is insulation. You talk to the window glazing guy, he tells you need double glazing, and all of a sudden you feel like a little bit overwhelmed that all of this advice, you're not sure exactly where to start. And that information is almost being gatekept by the professionals in the industry, telling you that the best solution is their solution. So I think what we realize is that there needs to be somebody out there in the space that's really on your side to offer advice that's actually not going to push you in one direction, that's really just there to answer your questions and provide you a bit of a shoulder to lean on so you can seek those solutions without feeling like you're going to be sold a product or a service. Now, up until June 23rd, as on Dean's slide mentioned, we operate under the Victorian Energy Efficiency Upgrades program, where we're actually able to offer energy assessments for free. Now, I will put out there, unfortunately, we are booked out until June 23rd. The activity is being paused until, I believe, sort of end of 2026. at which point we'll probably restart offering subsidised and ideally free services again. But there are options out there, and we're always available online and on the phone. So I might go to the next slide, please. So the first thing I want to talk about is what is an actual energy assessment. So I think at its core, we break an energy assessment down into three components that are actually measured. So the first is the thermal layer. So this is how heat moves throughout the whole home. So our glazing, building fabric, insulation, shading, and floor coverings. So anything, if you can imagine the house as an esky, anyway, whether that esky is made out of, it's a good Yeti, good quality esky, or whether it's more of a cardboard box. So understanding what's the fabric of that thermal layer that's going to be protecting us from those hot summer days and those cold winter nights. Then we move on to the air tightness. So how well the air's that the home's breathing, whether air's kind of freely flowing through the home. So how draft, seals, gaps, vents let warm or cool air leak in and out of the home. And then we look at all of your appliances and loads. So how heating, cooling, hot water, cooking, lighting, electronics are all using to how efficient is the home running all of its appliances. So I'll move on to the next slide. So the first part, we're looking at the glazing and the fabric. So windows, glass, walls, roofs, the building material, everything that holds and loses heat. So this is our thermal performance. Any external shading. So this is our eaves. If we're in some of the older homes, some of the new homes lack eaves. Floor coverings, where we've got rugs, where we've got carpet and underlay, insulation against cold floors, insulation in our ceilings, walls, underfloor, as well as our internal window coverings like curtains, blinds, pelmets that are going to trap the air, and how each of these layers interact with each other. So move on to the next slide. Then we're looking at the air tightness. So draft proofing, finding and sealing the gaps that let conditioned air escape. So I know that Dean mentioned it's one of those activities with draft proofing that as a tenant you can actually do. You do need the permission at the moment to do draft proofing, but they can't say no without a good reason. But as of middle of next year, or March next year, they're actually required to have done the draft proofing anyway. So if there's a need for you to do draft proofing by the middle of next year, it's because they actually aren't meeting the current compliance. So that covers caulking, appliance vents, windows and door seals, ceiling and wall vents, and of course, small gaps do add up. So when you start adding all of these little gaps and cracks together, we end up with, I explain it like, sitting on the highway doing 100 and just cracking the window. Often we end up getting a lot of cool air moving through the property when even through those little gaps. We'll move to the next slide. And then, of course, lastly, we're looking at the appliances. So how the home's heated, cooled, what hot water system's running, the lighting and the cooking appliances, solar and batteries, and EVs and chargers. So these are pretty self-explanatory. We look at what appliances are in the home and which of those are, really the hogs of the energy. So we commonly see that it's our heating and our hot water systems that are chewing up most of our energy costs. I'll go to the next slide, and then we move into what I say is the fourth, but probably the most important part of the assessment. So with this information prior, we have a good idea of how the home actually performs, but what we don't understand is you. So understanding who you are, your goals, your behaviors, when you're home, are you working days, nights, shift work? How many people live in the home? Are you renting the home, or are you owning the home, or are you a landlord looking at meeting certain minimum requirements? What your budget is that you want to spend, and how you want to do that, things like finance options if you need them, timelines. So for instance, is it a home that you're going to be living in for the next 6 months, 12 months, 20 years? Because obviously understanding the timeline, we can start looking at those investments as covering something that's, long-term, or whether it's a short-term quick win. And then understanding priorities around things like moisture, electrification, cooking and comfort, as well as air quality control. So I'll move on to the next slide. So what we really want to do is make sure that all of that advice is understandable. So we want to translate the assessment into plain language so you can see where comfort and savings really come from. So we don't want to get too technical. There's lots of technical language out there in the space, and it's our job to understand it, but it's also our job to make sure that we convey that information into really palatable information that people can understand, so they know what that next step is, so that we can start to work towards our priorities. So we can start ranking those changes, impact, costs, what's possible in your situation, but also help you start that journey. So we really want to make sure that when people are getting an assessment, they start stepping away from that. We call it decision-making paralysis, where so many people are so afraid of making the wrong decision or making the wrong steps that if we don't know where to start, where do we usually start? With nothing at all. And so we want to really avoid that by encouraging people that, there are small wins out there. They can start with those. And as their budget changes or their circumstances change, this can be something that they can work towards, but also just understanding what to look for at the point of a new lease. So if you are in a rental situation, when you are looking at the next property that whether you're buying or you're renting, understanding what you're looking for before you actually step into that property, so you don't end up falling into the trap of, the last rental property you were in had reverse cycle systems, and the new property you're stepping into has a large gas ducted system. So even though the rental price might be similar, you're moving into a category where all of a sudden your heating costs are going to be significantly more. So really just understanding what to look for. I'll go to the next slide, please. So I think the key here is, again, this talk is really focused on renters. So you may not own the walls, but comfort is still in your hands. Everything we recommend for renters follows 4 simple rules. You to stay warm without losing your bond. So we want to make sure it's accessible, cheap and easy to buy from any hardware store or online. We look at things like portable solutions. So if you are moving, making sure that these are products and services that potentially you can take with you, as well as simple. So we don't want to be accessing trades necessarily, because at the moment we start accessing professional services, often we start looking into much, much higher costs. And if it's not your home, we often see that a lot of renters don't want to invest too heavily into the property. And of course, we want to focus on those DIY projects if we can. So installs and removes without being marks or minimal wear and tear on the property. Go to the next slide. So one concept that we talked about, it sounds pretty simple, but heating the person, not the home. So quite often we'll see that a lot of people run their appliances really, really heavily, rather than just, looking for simple solutions. So layering up, so thermals, jumpers, and even an extra layer indoors means you'll feel warmer before any of your appliances are even switched on. So hoodies and throws, so they're the hooded blankets, or an hoodie traps body heat brilliantly and costs nothing to run once you own it. So just lots of blankets around the house, on the couches, in dining areas if you need them. Just anywhere that you can kind of reach for something that's going to keep you a bit warmer is a big win. And then also the plug-in electric throws. So often we see a lot of, especially the gas ducted systems that can't be what we call zoned. When you're heating the home, even if you're just hanging out in the lounge room, you end up turning on the heating and heating every bedroom in the house, the lounge room, every room in the home. So having those plug-in electric throws just in the lounge room can make it so that you've got something really cozy that's inexpensive to run. And a big one that I'm a big fan of is warming your feet first. So slippers and thick socks can stop heat escaping through cold floors and make the whole room feel warmer. Now, Dean, in his previous slides, mentioned, we generally only see about a 10 to 20% loss of heat through our floors. However, we're in constant contact with it. So even though we lose more heat through our walls and our roof, we're generally not hugging our walls and our roof, so we don't feel how cold they are. But on the floors, we definitely feel it. So naturally, if we're walking around in bare feet, we're more inclined to reach for those remotes to turn our appliances on if our feet are cold. So if we can warm our feet, we're generally less likely to reach for those appliances. So keep yourself warm rather than the home. That's one really easy win straight off the bat. I think we went There we go. Sealing the drafts, keeping your bond. So renter-friendly draft proofing peels off cleanly, and at the end of the lease, no damage, no lost bond, just a tighter, warmer home. This slide is a little bit outdated because obviously middle of next year, the draft proofing can stay because it legally has to. So one of the products that we constantly recommend is a V-Seal for hinged doors and windows. So if you just Google the product V-Seal, you'll find it. I know that there's the products available via EcoMaster here in Victoria. But you can get it online just through Amazon or just eBay. Have a look at that product. Really, really good product for any doors or windows that are on hinges. So your most common doors and windows. For anything that slides, so if you've got sliding windows and doors, we recommend a brush seal. It just obviously helps things move along a little bit easier, but still provides some draft proofing. And then sealing gaps around frames and along skirting boards with some caulking. So easy DIY, over to Bunnings, and you can whack this sort of stuff in an afternoon. Core flute over unused vents. So quite regularly, I'm not sure about the areas you guys are all living in, but especially in my area, I see lots of realtors and politicians putting up signs, and the product they're using is a product called Core Flute. So it's a plastic dual-layered product that you can buy from Bunnings. You can cut this to shape, and you can just tape this onto any vents or evaporative cooling vents, wall vents that you are not using. This just will stop that airflow escaping and going through those walls and roof that you don't want escaping. So we'll go on to the next one. Temporary glazing and smart coverings. So a really good product that I like to see is shrink film. It's effectively a double glazing product, but it's DIY. You can just Google a product called duck film. So you just stick this on, double-sided tape, use your hairdryer, and it will sort of shrink down and create a double glazing effect where it will trap the air between the two layers. On top of that, if you don't have a great outlook or you're just looking at close walls or neighbors, bubble wrap does a great job of still allowing natural light in, but you obviously lose a bit of that view. Does a great job of acting like a double glazing, traps the still air and mimics double glazing for a few dollars. On top of that, there is another product I recommend more for the summer. So if you've got western windows or northern windows and it gets a bit hot, you can look at a product called Wren Shade. Again, I believe that's more exclusively available through EcoMaster. And it's a great product for keeping the sun sort of off those windows and reflecting that solar heat back outside. Honeycomb blinds in front of the frame, so you can oversize the honeycomb blind a little bit and take these with you. So if you get a cellular or honeycomb blind mounted in front of the window rather than inside the frame, so it sort of sits flush against the wall, you can sort of get a really thermally, a really strong curtain that's going to keep a lot of that natural heat inside and outside of the home, sort of controlling that air really, really well. And close the gaps. So pairing coverings with the door snakes and your window glazings, dealing with, core flute with this is all really good, going to pair really well to help you stay comfortable in your home. Move on to the next one. So a lot of the homes that we go into, we see people making these choices of maybe they've got a reverse cycle already. So we recently did an assessment for an elderly lady in social housing. She was with a energy retailer and was currently in arrears. So she'd already owed money to them. They weren't able to obviously shut off her power because she was an at-risk household. And so for her, the energy retailer actually asked us to go and do an assessment and figure out why this lady's bill was so high. And when we walked in the door, worked out really, really quickly that this poor lady was running her fan heater. So, your little $20 Kmart bathroom heater. She was using that as her main source of heating for about 18 hours a day. And so that was chewing through the electricity and guzzling up a lot of power. Now, for her, the solution wasn't new appliances. It wasn't, running out. It wasn't door snakes and thermally broken curtains or anything like that. It it was actually just an education gap. So she actually had a reverse cycle on the property and just didn't understand that it was capable of heating and using a lot less power. So sometimes just looking at what's in the home and understanding how to use it, and the education gap for a lot of people is the big one. And so that's where we find we can get a lot of really cheap, easy wins where the solution here actually costs nothing. It was just an education piece. So like I said, if we don't have a split system, potentially look at that first solution there, which was heating yourself with layers first, or plug-in throws. Move to the next slide. So the other one is talking with your landlords. So some people are fortunate enough to have a direct relationship with landlords. Not everyone is fortunate enough and have to deal with property managers who sometimes can be really hard to deal with, but leading with the benefits. So efficient, comfortable homes attract good tenants, hold value and reduce maintenance call-outs, but also just at the minimum requirements coming in. I think there's going to be a lot of people scrambling in March next year to meet these requirements. Have the conversations now with them. Let them know, look, these standards are changing. You don't want to be stuck in a situation where you can't rent out the property for a period of time because you've got to wait for trades to get in there and actually meet these new requirements. I'm happy to give up, a day of my time to be home to let trades in so that you can actually meet these minimum standards now, so that we're not going to be running into these issues later on, because 1 month of missed rent for a landlord, that's them footing the bill on if it's an investment property, often they're footing the bill on that mortgage. So, it might be a difficult conversation, but just mention to them, you have to do this anyway. So start having those conversations now. Mention the rebates. There's lots of rebates out there. The rebates, they're very, very rarely means tested. There's only one type of rebate that's means tested. That's being dropped. The threshold for that means test is being lowered from a 210,000 to 150,000 joint income for your solar and hot water systems. But as for air conditioning, which is the requirement, there's no means testing. As for draft proofing, no means testing. So, a lot of the rebates are really easy to access. And put it in writing. Make sure you're just emailing so you've got a constant chain of communication, because you never know when somebody's just going to get CC'd on that email. Maybe they're going to CC the landlord by accident without BCCing them, and all of a sudden you've got a direct line of communication straight to the landlord themselves. And because I find sometimes this sort of stuff gets lost in translation if it's just a he said, she said phone calls. So start putting it into writing and just know the standards. So Dean did a great job explaining what those standards are going to be and what they are currently. So just making sure you get ahead and understand what they are for yourself. Go to the next slide, please. So why is electric the renter's best friend? So when rentals, gas hot water system or gas heaters reach the end of life, it must be replaced with electric heaters. We covered that in Dean's slides. They do have lower running costs. No more gas safety checks, so less home visits for the renters, but also less cost for the homeowners or the property owners there. And of course, cleaner and safe. Yeah, much better for our inside living when we're not breathing in our fossil fuel things we shouldn't be breathing in. Go to the next slide. Perfect. And that's kind of me. Like I said, a lot of the focus today was more on the rentals. But a lot of people use our services when they're buying properties, when they're looking at some people aren't comfortable talking to their renters and they just want to see if their properties are meeting those standards. But our big thing is just trying to help people get away from that decision-making paralysis and make sure that they feel like they're making the decision, that first step a lot more achievable for people. And I see we've got a few questions in the chat, but I don't know if Somali, you want to go through them one by one and me and Dean will jump on the answers.
I will do that. Thank you, James. That was great. Both presentations were very insightful and lots of information. Now, I just want to say that we've shared several helpful resources and links in our chat, including the State Electricity Commission of Victoria's one-stop shop, Tenants Victoria link, Consumer Affairs Victoria's link, the Victorian Government Energy Compare, and also the renter to landlord template letter, which has been developed by our good friends from the Friends of the Earth, and there's many more links that Dean's presentation. It's all in the chat box. Please take advantage of that. We will also share the links and the services uh, through. We'll upload it onto our website along with this recorded video. And I think there was a question in there about whether we would be sending the recording. We will be uploading it onto our website. We do have a whole heap of questions, so I'm going to throw it out there, and I'm happy for either one of you to respond. So the first question is for migrant renters who may face language barriers or feel hesitant to challenge landlords. What are the most practical and low risk ways to advocate for better energy efficiency without putting their housing at risk?
Ben, I'll let you take that one to start with. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, that's a concern of a lot of renters, whether they have language barriers or not. A lot of renters are anxious about putting their head above the fence.
Mm.
So yeah, it is a difficult problem, and having language barriers makes it much more difficult. Um, I think, if you're involved with a community organization that has, someone who can help you advocate for yourself with issues around, maybe already with issues around energy bill payment or other sort of financial issues. If a person's in connection with an organization that's got someone who can help you with that, that's a good way to go. And that's where I think, getting this information out there is really good for people working in those organizations so that they can do that more effectively. That's where I started my career in the community information sector. And yeah, a lot of what we did was helping people advocate on their own behalf, whether it was because they had language limitations or just because they were not confident, and having those access to resources is really good. So that's why doing this is great and sharing those links. But yeah, no, I agree. It's difficult. Yeah, I'm not sure what else to say about that.
Yeah, I
Not
think the
that
big
way.
one is get in touch with a community organization that's going to bridge that language gap for you. So an advocate, whether it could be something like Neighborhood House, it could be ECZV, or even just reaching out to people like ourselves in the energy assessment space, just so that you know your rights. And I don't want to fearmonger, but there's going to be a lot of landlords that are afraid of a $60,000 criminal charge for not meeting minimum standards. So if that's something that you just have to put in writing to the property manager that, look, these are not meeting the standards, and and send them a copy of that. All of a sudden, you'll see that a lot of things move very, very fast when there seems to be a looming $60,000 fine over their head. So I would say, look, don't be afraid to be a little bit tough. And if you are afraid to be a little bit tough, get in touch with someone that's going to support you and not be afraid to be a little bit tough.
I should just clarify on the fine issue for people's info. So there's a range of amounts of fines. The maximum fine for an individual property owner is, I think, about 11,000, and it's around 60,000 for a company that owns a rental property. That's not the real estate agent; it's a company that owns property. So that's the range. Yeah.
Thank you. The other question is, I think there's similar questions around this. My understanding is that at the moment there is no specific protection against rent increases in response to installation of energy efficient devices. Example, RC stroke AC. When I have talked to renters, they have voiced concern about blowback in the form of higher rent. Do any of you have any information around policy we could call for rectify this problem?
I can start on that one. I agree. It's a source of anxiety, and it probably is a risk in some situations. I think the government is aware of the risk, but is not quite sure how to fully address it. They have made some changes that will probably help a little bit, They've given VCAT, which is a body that hears disputes between, say, landlords and tenants. They've given them more reasons why that they can consider when they're deciding if a rent increase is justified. There are some tighter rules around how the rent increase is delivered and calculated. As in, you have to give the owner has to give 90 days notice. They have to give a clear information of how and why the rent is increasing, so it's documented. Um, and and VCAP, if they're assessing a dispute, can consider things like what condition is the property in, what are rents like for similar properties in the area, how often has the rent increased. I think that helps a bit, but it actually doesn't reduce the problem. And I'm absolutely sure there will be some owners who will try unjustified rent increases in response to this. I've already seen people doing it in response to other national tax change law that hasn't even come into effect and won't affect them. Sometimes rental providers, unfortunately, just sort of try it on. Um, so yeah, I'm also concerned about that. I would like to see more controls on rents, and they're not there. But it is a bit better than it used to be. So I guess that's something. I don't know what you reckon, James.
Yeah, I actually, maybe I'm the eternal optimist, but I think that the market will actually not allow that. So people are already we're in a bit of a cost of living crisis as it is. People, I believe, are kind of paying what they can for rent. And so if they can't afford them, people will move. And, so the landlords might threaten that they're going to put prices up, but, the price that they would put it up, they're much, much more afraid of having a rental empty for a month or two than they are not just being compliant. So they might kick and scream and throw the toys out of the basket a little bit, but in reality, it's much, much easier and more affordable for them to be compliant than it isn't. And not only that, there's the wins for them. These at
Mm.
some point they're going to have to get new appliances for these properties, and right now the government's providing significant support to make that achievable for them. So I'd hate to be a landlord that doesn't do it and does it in 10 years when some of these rebates disappear and prices are two, three, four times what they are for these same appliances. So I think that realistically, you won't see across the whole market averages. I'm sure that we'll see, like Dean mentioned, individual landlords might try it on, but as a market, I don't think we'll see, big increases in rent just because of new minimum requirements.
Yeah, and look, I do generally agree with that. Rents tend to reflect the weird supply and demand thing, and costs don't fluctuate as much. Another thing that I think landlords should be thinking about, if they're not, is that if they do lose a tenant because of a rent increase, then they've got to do a new lease, and then they've got to meet all the standards all at once. And
Mm.
that's,
Absolutely.
I mean, I mean, that's sort of a good thing for the housing stock, but that's going to make a landlord pause about, maybe I should, like you said, James, try and do, try and bring it in and keep the tenant. Because yeah, living
Absolutely.
in an empty home for a few months is not good for.
Mm. So the other question that came through is many migrant renters live in older, poorly insulated homes or in public housing. What realistic improvements can they push for that landlords are likely to agree to?
Look, I think the first one is those minimum standards. So the new minimum standards coming in, just pushing for those because that's already really big wins from where
Mhm.
we see the standards are currently. So we're going to see some big wins there. So just again, engaging with a company or organization that's got those interests at heart, making sure that you're accessing that as easily as possible. But a lot of the real estate sort of property managers now, they're actually working with consultants. My meeting before this one was actually with one of those consultants for about an hour, who are looking at how these companies can reach out to all the landlords of all these properties that they manage and start putting together a bit of a package for them that includes all those minimum requirements so that they can hit them before the March deadline. So trying to make it as achievable and affordable for the landlord who own the properties and as little interruption to all parties involved. Um, but yeah, just engage, make sure that property is hitting those minimum requirements, and also just DIY projects. So look at what it is that you can do to the property, that I find a lot of the migrant communities that are coming over here are generally coming, like the older migrant communities coming over here, are generally coming over here to be with family. And so we find that a lot of the time they've got that support network for DIY projects as well. So we had a gentleman, similar situation to that, an elderly Greek man, had a couple of sons over here that were willing to kind of help and support. And then on a weekend, they went to Bunnings, grabbed a little bit of insulation and whacked it above his living room and his bedroom. Just small things. They didn't insulate the whole house, but just the main rooms where he spent most of his time. It was maybe a couple of $100 in insulation, and it just made the whole home where he spent the majority of his time a lot more comfortable. They did a little bit of caulking, a little bit of draft proofing, and showed him how to set a timer on the reverse cycle for his system, so that he never actually had to touch it. It was just set up for him. So lots of different solutions out there. But like I said, if you are struggling for a solution, that's why we exist. We're there to kind of be the unbiased friend in the space and not sell a product or a service. And even if it's just a phone call, and people just have quick questions, that's what we do.
Okay. I'll ask both of these questions together. So one is, how do you find out what efficient rating the appliances in your property have? And secondly is, how can we seal gaps, avoid heat escaping without causing damp and mold to develop at the same time due to lack of ventilation?
I reckon James, do you want to?
Yeah, so things like mold. So here in Melbourne, we do have a slightly higher humidity, so dehumidifiers, things like that, but also heating the home. So running those heating appliances to dry the house out is always important. But I mean, lucky or unlucky, a lot of the homes that we built here in Australia really do lack the air tightness. So we generally don't see, when we're sealing up these homes, that they're actually passing a blower door test and are airtight anyway. It's just reducing the amount of uncontrolled air escaping. But really, it's about heating those homes, because what we see is when we have a mold issue, it's generally not a ventilation problem. It's usually a temperature problem. So bathrooms are really, really cold. They never heat up, and then that hasn't got anywhere to go. So when I spent a little bit of time over in Europe, we used to open the doors up to the house in the middle of the day for about an hour. You'd let the whole house air out, but yeah, really, really making sure the home's not too cold, so the dew points, not as low. Kind of like when it's cold outside and we breathe, we can see the moisture in the air. That's where we start seeing moisture problems, when the temperature's too low. So kind of trying to keep that home up around 22 degrees. So things like insulation, more constant heating. So right now, with a lot of gas appliances, because they are expensive, we see people just running them for a couple of hours a day, and those temperatures in the houses drop right down at night or drop right down during the mornings, where we could actually see with reverse cycle a more consistent temperature, less humidity is kind of going to be present in the property anyway.
How can renters practically navigate situations where a property meets minimum standards on paper, but is still inefficient or expensive to run without relying on landlord goodwill?
Yeah, that's a hard one. And that would probably be because there's aspects of the house that are not covered by the standards, and the insulation is a great example. The insulation standard's not in yet. Even when it comes in, a house that's got partial insulation won't necessarily get upgraded. This is where I think some of the DIY sort of stuff that James talked about are great, and especially with the focus that you gave us, James, about what are the bits to mostly pay attention to. Um, but yeah, I think it's really hard without the landlord goodwill, and I think that's why we've now got
Oh,
standards, because landlord goodwill has, unfortunately. I mean, there's obviously exceptions. I've had some great landlords, but there are many who don't, and that is real. So that's where I think the stuff that James is talking about is really important about what you
I,
can do.
I think I'll kind of lean back on, I think it's an education piece, right? And we're not just talking about educating the renters. the industry and, government already understand the standards. The renters and occupants are starting to learn the standards, and the landlords, but it's really about educating also the property management industry. And I think this is where we actually, when we say we've got good landlords and bad landlords, often it's the landlords actually are not too involved. They just hire a property management company, and that property management company, that's where we usually see the good and the bad, is how well or receptive to communication that these companies are. And generally, the landlords who are looking to get as much of that rental income as possible. So where you get a poor property manager is the one who's charging the lowest price to the landlord and wants to be as hands off as possible and just clip a little bit of that rental income. So I think the education needs to be passed on to the real estate industry that these changes are coming. There's heavy penalties. Compliance is going to be audited. I know from our side, as doing assessments, if we see these, because previously there was not really a lot of monitoring in the space, but now with these big changes, we're more than happy to, on your behalf, go and talk to these property managers and just say, look, listen, because for us, it actually allows us to communicate with that industry and kind of educate them, and that's what we're all about anyway. So we really want to see the space of property management and landlords really move into the educated realm as well, not just the renters understanding their rights, but making sure the property managers really understand. Because I still see it today where people say, oh no, there's no pets in this building, you're not allowed pets. And it's like, well, hang on, that's not a thing. Your rights as a renter allow you this stuff, but there's people still afraid to put things on the walls, people not wanting to do anything, because I think that old mentality of how property management was done still carries over to some property managers today. And the truth is that those people actually need to be on this education journey with us.
And this is where I think one of the changes that is coming in with the other rental reforms will flow through to better outcomes there, which is mandatory training and licensing of property managers. Over time, that will hopefully, if it's done well, produce sort of more educated, more focused, better property managers. And certainly in my life as a renter, what you're saying, James, absolutely agree. The good property manager makes everything so much easier because they'll draw the connection between the owner, who often, just doesn't know that there's a problem.
Yeah, of course.
Mm. So there's a couple of questions that are saying the same thing. So what's the most common energy efficiency problem you see in rental homes that aren't obvious to tenants, but have a big impact on comfort and bills? And I'll also say, and what's the realistic timeline for phasing out gas in rental properties, and how might this differ for older and lower quality housing stock?
So I think one is obviously the replacement of end-of-life appliances from 2027 have to go all electric anyway, I believe with the exception of the cooking appliance. Is that correct, Dean?
Yeah.
But what we'll see is that as of next year, appliances break. Usually most appliances in the home have sort of a 7 to 15-year life expectancy. And so we're going to start seeing appliances, and it's probably a little bit less in rental properties because most of the time those products that the landlords are putting in are not the premium high-end products. They're usually looking for more budget-friendly because they're not products that they're really getting the benefit out of themselves. So they tend to go for the more affordable options. So we do see those life expectancies on appliances being a little bit shorter in rental properties. So I think that as of 2027, we're just going to start seeing a constant wave of appliances being added to rental properties. And over the sort of the next decade, I think most of those appliances will actually shift over to all electric. And not only that, the aging gas infrastructure, at some point, a lot of the infrastructure that relies on gas, they're going to start going, well, who's footing the bill for this? And so it's going to be not really achievable for a lot of people. Obviously, industry is going to rely on gas for a little bit longer, but as a residential product, it's not something that most people are going to want because it's actually going to get more expensive because all things like maintenance on the infrastructure is being spread across a thinner and thinner, you know, target audience who's actually using the product. And so I think that we'll start seeing electrification just kind of pick up more and more and more, especially as we start seeing things like, 3 free hours of electricity during the middle of the day. We start seeing lower energy costs, electricity costs compared to gas prices, and just more efficient appliances in general. So it just kind of makes sense for not just renters, but it actually starts to make sense for the landlords, because they have to hire the plumbers to do these gas checks every year, and the rebates, they're not going to last forever. I don't want to fearmonger and say that you're going to get rid of all the rebates anytime soon. But again, whilst there is government aid and support to do this, you'd almost be silly not to kind of take advantage of that, because at some point you're going to have to do it anyway. There's no better time than now to take advantage of that. I don't know if you want to add on that, Dean.
I think you made some really good points. I wonder if maybe some of the oldest and worst rental properties will end up electrifying sooner, because they've probably got the oldest appliances that are more likely to break down. I
Absolutely.
wonder. But the other dynamic that happens is that, there's over time, there's a change of houses between owner occupied and rental. We are now seeing more solar in rental properties just because people who put solar on their homes 10 or 15 years ago have sold their homes, and now they're a rental. There's a bit of a lag. And I think, there's been a huge increase in electrification over the last few years. In 10 years' time, that is really going to be flowing through the rental market in addition to the stuff that's upgraded as a result of these laws. So I think we do get there. It will take a while. My gas ducted heater broke down last year, and the landlord put in brand new gas ducted heater. So I was like, oh, okay, I'm not going to get my own recycle air conditioner for 20 years. But
Yeah.
hopefully someone else's breaks down next year, and they'll get the good stuff, and that will start to come
I
through.
mean, the good thing with that, like even if you did get that, I'm not sure what the cooling was in the rental property, but decommissioning that gas ducted, if you decommission it, yes, he might have paid a lot of money for it,
Yeah,
but if there's no adequate cooling in the space, he's still going to have to put that in, and the most affordable way
yeah,
for
that's
him to
right.
actually
Yeah,
add that is just to actually pull out that existing ducted
yeah.
heating. So, we see ducted systems go in, and a year later are being pulled out because the rebate that you get for pulling out those systems is sometimes in the $8,000
Oh,
mark
yeah.
of
Yes.
pulling out those systems. So it still might be more financially viable for landlords to pull out those new systems, rather than putting in new split ducted reverse cycle systems in. So it's still an option.
Thank you. We're going to take one more last question because we're coming to the end of our webinar. How much does it cost to do the assessment?
Yeah, so I wish I had my magic 8 ball at the moment. So for the last 3 years, we've been operating under the Residential Efficiency Scorecard program here in Victoria, which has actually allowed us to do the assessments for free across the state. So, Melanie, you actually had one of these assessments done.
Mhm.
It was a free service. There's no cost. There's no sale process. We're actually fully funded. As of June 24th, so June 23rd, the program ends. What they're actually doing, they're not getting rid of the activity, so that the funded activity is called HERA. What they're doing is actually shutting down the Residential Efficiency Scorecard program, and they're changing it over to a national program called NatHERS for existing home. So what that means is that us as assessors, we're just getting a tool update. So we're just getting new tools to be able to do the job, which we're excited about. There's some more new accurate tools coming out that require some upskilling and training. Most of our team have actually finished all of the training. That assessment becomes available as of July 1st. However, it's not yet approved as a rating tool for the Essential Services Commission. However, we expect that to change and become an approved rating tool within the state of Victoria. So it's an approved product in this nationally. It's just not approved for rebates, and that's up for review at the end of 2026. So at that time, we will hopefully be able to continue doing free energy assessments here in the state of Victoria. Until then, to get a NatHERS, we're trying to, because our team is obviously upskilling and learning the tool, we're looking at what NatHERS certificates generally cost. It's around that $300, $350 for a NatHERS certificate at the moment. We're hoping that we can probably pull that around to around $200 odd dollars for, especially for renters, because our main thing is about remaining accessible to people. And we just find that people just who think that getting advice is too expensive often fall into the trap of overpaying for the services later on, and we see it all the time. So the people who don't pay for an energy assessment end up going with the expensive heat pumps, the expensive air conditioners, the expensive solar, expensive batteries, expensive insulation. And not that these services are bad, it's just that sometimes there are significantly more competitive quotes out there and companies out there, but also you don't want to fall into the trap of going with the cheapest product or service out there and end up where you might have saved yourself, a couple of $1,000s up front, but you end up, going with a company that's going to disappear on you in, 6 months, and something goes wrong, and you end up, saving money at the start, but costing you thousands of dollars later on, where you've got to replace these services. And unfortunately, a lot of these rebates for activities can only be used once on the property. So you might have got a discounted, really cheap aircon unit or cheap hot water system, and it's broken down, and that company who installed it has disappeared or whatever it might be. And so you end up copping the full whack of the replacement without any support, because you already technically got the support when you installed the cheaper product early on. So I guess it might seem expensive to some people getting an assessment, but we want to make sure that the value is that you get that truly unbiased guidance, that we're hopefully pointing you in the right direction. And hopefully end of the year, we'll be able to resume free assessments for the state.
Thank you so much, both. That brings us to the end of our questions. I just want to remind people, do make use of the links that have been shared in the chat. There's a real wealth of information, and do share it with your communities as well, please. There will be a short feedback survey after the session ends. Please take a minute or two to complete this. I want to thank both Dean and James for all the information that you've shared. Your knowledge is enormous. So I thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.